The cuffs clicked before she could explain. The sound echoed through the marble halls of Rivergate Federal Savings, sharp, final, almost ceremonial. Two officers tightened their grip on her wrists, guiding her past rows of silent onlookers who had no idea who she really was. The air inside that bank felt heavy, like judgment itself had filled the room. Her voice trembled, calm, controlled, but confused. "You've made a mistake," she said softly. But no one listened. The customers standing in line froze where they were. A mother clutched her child's hand a little tighter. An older man lowered his head, pretending not to see. Eyes darted between her face and the badge-shaped bulge under her blazer. Phones lifted, screens recording, each second feeding a story that would soon escape those walls. Someone whispered, "She tried to cash a fake check." The phrase rippled across the lobby like a spark in dry grass. In that single instant, perception replaced truth. Judgment spread faster than reason. The tellers whispered to one another, the manager avoided her gaze, and the officers moved with a confidence that came not from evidence, but assumption. What no one in that bank knew, not the manager who dialed the police, not the officers who stormed through the glass doors, was that the woman they had in handcuffs wasn't a fraudster. She wasn't a con artist. Her name was Dr. Maya Ellison, and she was a federal agent. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How does a federal agent end up in handcuffs inside a neighborhood bank she's visited for years? What made a routine deposit turn into a full-scale public arrest? And when the truth surfaced, why did so many wish it had stayed buried? These were the questions that gripped the nation when footage of Maya's arrest hit social media. Millions watched the moment she was pushed against the counter, her calm composure mistaken for arrogance, her explanations drowned by authority. Overnight, a private moment became a public spectacle. But this story, this one, isn't just about race or power. It's about what happens when perception replaces truth. When a lifetime of service, discipline, and integrity can't protect you from the assumptions of strangers. And to understand how it all began, we need to go back to the morning of the day that changed everything for Maya Ellison. In the days that followed, one question echoed louder than the rest. How does something like this even happen? How does a woman, respected, disciplined, and sworn to protect, become the target of the very system she once served? Clips of the incident spread across the internet within hours. News anchors debated what little information they had. Forgery, some called it. A misunderstanding, others claimed. But behind every headline was a face, Maya's face, frozen mid-motion, confusion etched in her eyes as if trying to make sense of a world that suddenly saw her differently. And then came the silence, the kind that lingers after outrage fades. Reporters moved on to the next story. Commentators found new talking points. But for Maya, the moment replayed endlessly in her mind. The marble floors, the weight of the cuffs, the disbelief in her own voice as she said, "You've made a mistake." She wasn't angry at first. She was stunned. How do you explain to a stranger that you are not who they think you are? That your entire life, your education, your service, your badge, means nothing in the shadow of their assumptions? Inside her apartment that night, her phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from colleagues, old friends, even strangers she had never met. Some offered support, others offered sympathy, but most just wanted to know one thing. What really happened inside that bank? The truth was more complicated than anyone imagined. The officers who made the arrest claimed they were following procedure. The bank said they were just being cautious. But those words, procedure, caution, quickly began to sound like excuses. And soon the public began asking harder questions. What exactly triggered that call to the police? Why didn't anyone verify her identity before handcuffing her? And perhaps most importantly, what does it say about a system when even those within it aren't safe from its flaws? In the midst of all the noise, one thing became clear. This was no longer a local incident. This was a national conversation about race, bias, and trust. But before the headlines and the outrage, there was just one woman standing in front of a counter, holding a simple check that represented something deeply personal. To understand that moment and why it spiraled the way it did, we have to go further back before the arrest, before the accusations, back to the morning everything began. That morning, everything felt ordinary, the kind of morning that feels too quiet to carry the weight of change. Maya Ellison woke up to the soft hum of her alarm, the faint light of dawn seeping through half-closed blinds. Her kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon, the radio whispering old jazz in the background. She wasn't rushing, she never did. Years in the bureau had trained her to move with purpose, deliberate, precise, always calm under pressure. But that morning she wasn't an agent. She was just Maya. She'd planned this day for weeks. The check she held on her kitchen counter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a promise fulfilled. Nearly $400 she'd saved from her late father's insurance payout, meant for a small community tech center being built in his honor. To anyone else, it was a simple donation. But to Maya, it was legacy, a continuation of the values he had lived by. Integrity, self-reliance, discipline. Her father, Raymond Ellison, wasn't a man of wealth. He was a man of principle. A retired high school teacher, beloved by students who still remembered his words decades later. "What you build should outlast you," he used to tell her. After he passed, Maya carried that line like scripture. It guided every choice she made, every investigation she took on, every long night spent chasing justice for people she'd never meet. And that's why she chose Rivergate Federal, her father's bank. The same place where he opened his first account, where he'd bring her as a child, teaching her how to sign her name neatly on deposit slips. The tellers knew her face, or at least they used to. She trusted that place. It represented familiarity, safety. Or so she thought. As she got ready, she noticed a photo on her fridge. Her and her father at the community park, groundbreaking. Both smiling, both proud. She touched the edge of the picture and whispered, "This one's for you, Dad." Her mind wasn't on work that day. It wasn't on federal cases or operations or anything remotely close to law enforcement. She was thinking about how far they'd come as a family, about the kids who would one day walk into that tech center and learn what her father had taught her, that knowledge changes everything. Before leaving, she double-checked the envelope, the check carefully folded inside. She even called the community director, confirming that she'd drop it off after cashing it. Everything felt simple, routine, safe. But life has a way of hiding its turning points in the quietest of moments. Sometimes the decisions that alter everything, they don't feel like choices at all. They feel like errands. When Maya walked out the door that morning, she wasn't walking into danger or scandal or headlines. She was walking towards something she believed in, a small gesture of hope backed by a lifetime of integrity. And that's what made what happened next so devastating. Because inside that bank, truth wasn't loud enough to be heard, and perception became judgment. Before we move forward, let me ask you something. What would you have done in Maya's place? Have you ever had a moment where doing the right thing was mistaken for something wrong? Think about that for a second, because as we move into what happened next, it's that question that will define everything. Rivergate Federal Savings sat quietly on the corner of Brookstone Avenue and 3rd, the kind of bank that prided itself on small-town values, polite smiles, and laminated signs that read, "We value our customers." To Maya, walking through those glass doors felt familiar, almost nostalgic. The air smelled faintly of paper and sanitizer, the soft hum of printers mixing with the chatter of customers waiting in line. She nodded to the guard by the entrance, a man she'd seen many times before. He smiled back out of habit, not recognition. The check was tucked neatly in an envelope, warm from the heat of her hands. She stood patiently behind an elderly woman, depositing coins into a clear jar, her mind already on her next errand. When her turn came, Maya stepped forward, smiled politely, and handed over the check. The teller glanced at it, smiled back faintly, and began typing. But the moment she entered the amount, something changed. Her expression stiffened, barely but enough for Maya to notice. The teller's fingers hovered above the keyboard for longer than they should have. Her eyes flicked to the name on the check, then up to Maya, then to a manager standing a few feet away. That's when Maya felt it, that subtle shift in the room's energy, a glance too long, a silence too heavy. The manager walked over, pretending to organize papers. "Is there an issue?" Maya asked, her tone calm. "Oh no, just standard verification," the manager replied, though his voice didn't match the words. Another teller whispered something behind them. Maya caught fragments. "Amount ID looks fake." The words weren't loud, but in that kind of silence they didn't have to be. Minutes passed. The line behind her grew longer. Maya could feel the weight of eyes on her back. People shifted, whispered, stared. Her palms grew warm. She showed her driver's license, then her work ID. The manager barely glanced at them. "We're just waiting for confirmation," he said. She could hear the faint buzz of his phone as he typed something, a text maybe, or a call for backup. Outside, 2 patrol cars began to slow near the curb. The first siren chirped softly, not the loud blare of an emergency, but the quiet announcement of authority. Maya's heart rate quickened, though her face remained composed. She'd seen scenes like this before, but never from this side of the counter. The doors opened. 2 officers stepped in, hands resting near their holsters, the kind of casual readiness that felt more like suspicion than safety. The manager pointed. "That's her." No hesitation, no questions, just certainty, the dangerous kind. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible fraudulent transaction," one officer said. Maya blinked, confused. "Fraudulent? That check is mine. You can verify the account." But the officer cut her off. "We'll sort it out at the station." The second officer stepped closer, reaching for her wrist. "Wait," she said softly, trying to stay calm. "This is a misunderstanding. My name is Dr. Maya Ellison. I work with the Bureau." "Please, step away from the counter," the first officer interrupted. His tone was clipped, professional, final. Around them, phones were already lifting, recording, flashing red dots of live streams. Someone muttered, "Another scammer caught." Another whispered, "She doesn't look like a doctor." When the cuffs clicked, the sound was louder than it should have been. Sharp, final. She flinched, not from pain but disbelief. The entire room seemed to exhale at once. The teller stepped back. The manager avoided eye contact. The customers stared in silence. "They called it protocol," the officer would later say. But for Maya, it wasn't protocol. It was humiliation. Every ounce of dignity stripped away in seconds. Every plea drowned by assumptions. She looked around one last time as they led her out. The marble floor reflecting the harsh fluorescent light, the faint scent of copier ink, the quiet that always follows injustice before anyone realizes what they've witnessed. As the officers pushed open the glass doors, the sun hit her face. Cameras followed. The whispers became headlines. And in that instant, the life she had built, her career, her reputation, her name, began to unravel. Because what happened inside that bank wasn't just an arrest. It was the spark of a nationwide outrage. And what followed would make national headlines. If you're still with us, drop a comment saying, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's following the truth this far, because the story you think you know is only getting started. By the time the sun dipped behind the downtown skyline, the video had already gone viral. A grainy clip of Dr. Maya Ellison being led out of Rivergate Federal Savings in handcuffs, her face calm but bewildered, her voice drowned out by murmurs and camera shutters. It spread across every platform, reposted, re-edited, dissected. Headlines called her the woman with the fake check. But no one asked what that check was for. No one stopped to ask why. Within hours, her name, or what little the internet thought it knew of it, trended nationwide. Justice for Maya appeared first as a whisper, then as a roar. Activists demanded answers, journalists flooded her old neighborhood, and talk show hosts turned her story into a symbol of everything broken about trust and authority. People argued in comments, in living rooms, in classrooms. Some said she must have done something wrong. Others said she was proof of everything they'd feared all along. But behind the noise, behind the outrage, something else was happening. Inside the Bureau's quiet grey headquarters, her colleagues sat in stunned silence, watching the same footage the world was watching. Except for them, it wasn't just another headline, it was their agent. Someone who had worked undercover for years. Someone who'd carried out operations with precision and integrity. They knew her discipline, her record, her name. And they knew, without a shred of doubt, that the system had failed her. An internal inquiry began the next morning. No press releases, no statements, just quiet meetings behind glass doors, files reviewed, calls traced. Every detail from the incident was dissected. The officers involved had already given their report. Suspicious check, uncooperative subject, standard arrest. But the footage told another story, one of calm composure met with misplaced authority, one of assumptions weaponized by routine. Meanwhile, at Rivergate Federal, the manager issued a short statement. "We regret the misunderstanding," he said, eyes downcast, voice rehearsed. But there was no apology, not to Maya, not to the community, not to the truth. The statement ended with a phrase often used to close the doors on accountability. "We followed procedure." And yet, every detail of that procedure began to unravel. A copy of the bank's internal messages surfaced online, leaked, forwarded, screenshotted thousands of times. In one message, an employee described Maya as acting entitled. In another, a supervisor wrote, "It's probably fake, just call it in." Words typed in haste, now preserved forever, evidence of the quiet bias that led to a public collapse. The FBI's investigation moved quietly but fast. They discovered that the check Maya tried to deposit was a verified grant donation, part of a local federal program meant to rebuild underfunded community centers, a program she herself had helped establish years earlier. Every signature matched, every figure accounted for. The same institutions that doubted her had benefited from her work, but as the truth spread, so did the damage. Her image became a battlefield, people questioning her motives, her background, her right to dignity. Late-night hosts made jokes, commentators debated her tone of voice, her expression, even the way she stood during the arrest. Every detail of her humanity turned into a spectacle. And yet, through all of it, Maya remained silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood the weight of her silence. The Bureau urged her to stay quiet during the inquiry, to let the process unfold. But the world outside didn't wait. It never does. By week's end, the officers were placed on administrative leave. The bank's CEO went on camera, insisting their actions weren't about race, gender, or status, just a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings don't trend for weeks. They don't fracture communities or expose systemic fault lines. They don't end careers overnight. Then came the turning point. One of the Bureau's analysts, a quiet, meticulous agent named Avery Cole, uncovered something unexpected. A series of deleted internal emails from Rivergate's compliance department. In them, an employee expressed concern over the call to the police, warning that the transaction had cleared within minutes. Another email followed. "Too late, officers already on site." That single sentence changed everything. It wasn't a system failure. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was a choice. One made in a moment of doubt and fear, carried out without verification, justified by prejudice disguised as caution. By then, Maya's name had become more than a headline. It was a question echoing across the country. How many times had this happened before? How many voices had gone unheard because they didn't have a camera, a platform, or a title that forced the world to listen? The story that began in one quiet suburban bank was now under federal review. But for Maya, it wasn't about headlines or apologies or compensation. It was about reclaiming the truth that had been taken from her in a single afternoon. And when she finally broke her silence, the world would hear what the cameras never caught. Would you have kept quiet if this had happened to you? Or would you have spoken out, knowing your voice could cost you everything? Because the truth was about to surface, and it would change everything. When Dr. Maya Ellison finally spoke, it wasn't in a press conference or an interview. It was in a hearing room, plain walls, soft lighting, the kind of silence that hums louder than sound itself. Cameras weren't allowed, but word spread quickly about what she said that day. She didn't start with anger. She started with a question. "How do you prove your innocence?" she asked, "when no one ever believed you were innocent to begin with?" Across the room, the panel shifted uncomfortably. They weren't prepared for what came next. Maya didn't talk about herself. She talked about others, names she'd seen in reports, cases she'd reviewed, people who'd lived versions of her story, but never made it past the first headline. She spoke calmly, every word deliberate, every pause heavy. "We build systems," she said, "that claim to protect us. But too often, those same systems forget who they're meant to serve." The hearing was meant to last 30 minutes. It stretched past 2 hours. Behind the cameras, the Bureau's representatives sat in uneasy silence. They knew what was coming. Because in the weeks after the incident, Avery Cole, the analyst who'd uncovered those deleted emails, had found something even bigger. Something that explained why the check had triggered suspicion in the first place. The grant Maya was depositing wasn't just any payment. It was tied to a federal initiative, one meant to expose financial irregularities in local development funds. An initiative that, quietly, had made some very powerful people uncomfortable. The moment her name hit that bank system, internal flags went up, not because of fraud, but because of what her involvement might uncover. Someone, somewhere, had seen her name and decided she wasn't a customer. They decided she was a threat. The deleted emails told part of the story. But hidden deep in the metadata of those messages was something else. The IP address of an external contractor, a consultant connected to Rivergate's internal auditing software. That address traced back to a private firm based in Arlington, Virginia. A firm with quiet ties to federal oversight contracts. Someone had been monitoring certain transactions long before that day. Maya's wasn't supposed to be one of them. But it got flagged anyway. And when the teller called the manager, the chain reaction began. Avery brought this information to the Bureau's oversight committee. What he found shook them. For years, the same system that promised to protect financial integrity had been weaponized for selective monitoring. Innocent transactions, especially from government-connected accounts, were quietly flagged, misclassified, and sometimes even leaked to competitors or local authorities under the guise of risk management. Maya's check just happened to be the spark that lit the fuse. But when Avery tried to escalate the findings, his report was buried. The Bureau didn't want another scandal, not so soon. So he went to Maya. They met in silence late at night in the Bureau's empty parking lot. She listened, face still, eyes tired. And when he handed her the printed data logs, she simply said, "Then we let them see it." The next morning, an anonymous data leak hit every major outlet. Emails, IP logs, meeting notes, every buried report, published. Within hours, the narrative shifted. The bank wasn't the story anymore. The system was. Rivergate Federal Savings became a symbol of something far larger, an ecosystem of fear and negligence built to protect reputations rather than people. Talk shows changed their tone. Commentators who once doubted her now called her a whistleblower. But Maya didn't want praise. She wanted accountability. Because the truth wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or labeled suspicious without proof. It was about the quiet ways authority rewrites reality until it feels justified. And so, in that hearing room, Maya said the words that would echo long after the cameras left. When a system assumes guilt before truth, it's not justice, it's survival disguised as order. Silence followed, not applause, just silence, the kind that makes you realize something irreversible has just been said. Before we move forward, let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Maya's position? Would you have stayed silent to protect your career, or spoken out knowing the cost? Because sometimes, the real story isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about who refused to stay quiet when it mattered most. 3 months later, the doors of the federal courthouse opened to the same sound Maya remembered from that day in the bank. The echo of footsteps, the murmur of a crowd, the quiet hum of judgment hanging in the air. But this time, she wasn't the one in handcuffs. She was walking free, her head held high, every step a reminder that she had survived something designed to break her. Outside, The crowd waited. Reporters, supporters, strangers who'd seen her story unfold online and felt something they couldn't quite explain. Maybe outrage, maybe recognition, maybe guilt. Inside, the verdict was read. The jury found Rivergate Federal Savings guilty of wrongful arrest, negligence, and violation of federal discrimination statutes. The room didn't erupt in cheers, just a stillness that felt sacred. Maya closed her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. And for her, that was enough. But the victory wasn't about one woman versus a bank. It was about what it revealed. The footage, the emails, the reports, they all told the same story. That perception, when left unchecked, becomes its own kind of violence. For years, institutions had taught people to trust systems more than they trusted each other. Maya's case cracked that illusion wide open. Policies changed. Federal agencies revised their training manuals. Internal reviews were launched across state lines. New guidelines required every arrest to be followed by immediate identity verification before charges could be logged. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And yet, behind every reform, Maya saw the faces of those who didn't live long enough to see theirs. She remembered the headlines she'd read before her own name became one of them. People who'd been dismissed, ignored, forgotten. The kind of injustice that never makes it to trial because it's been normalized. Because it happens quietly, because it's easier to move on. But she refused to. In one of her final public statements, she said, "Justice isn't a finish line. It's a choice we have to make again and again, even when it's inconvenient." The crowd stood in silence. She wasn't just speaking about her case, she was speaking about everyone's. Because what happened to her wasn't rare. It was just finally recorded. Years later, Rivergate reopened under new management. New name, new policies. But the marble floors were still the same place where everything had changed. Maya visited once, quietly, without a camera crew or an audience. She walked past the counter where she'd been handcuffed, stopped for a moment, and took a slow breath. A teller recognized her and whispered, "I'm sorry for what happened." Maya nodded. "So am I," she replied softly. "But we're both still here." Outside, she stood under the grey sky, the city's noise fading around her. She wasn't looking for redemption. She was looking for peace. For the first time, she felt it. And as she walked away from that building, one question echoed louder than all the others. What would you have done if it were you? If the world decided your truth didn't matter, would you fight? Would you forgive? Or would you stay silent and let someone else become the next headline? Because at its core, Maya's story isn't about one woman. It's about all of us. About the assumptions we make, the judgments we pass, and the humanity we forget to see. Before we close, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our next investigation. Because the next story we uncover might be one that changes everything you thought you knew. And remember, the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just shows you who you really are.